Are you a healer trying to work with entity interference, using techniques you've learned, doing your best, but still seeing the same patterns return in your clients, or worse, finding yourself increasingly overrun? Most healers have been taught that entity work is about release, clear it, move on, protect the field, and they repeat this cycle over and over, working in damage control. But command is not just release. Command is spiritual authority, where a being has no choice but to leave. And if you don't understand the rules of the realms you're working in, you're not just ineffective, you're playing a dangerous game. I'm Tracey and I've spent the last decade commanding and releasing demonic and multidimensional entity interference at the highest levels. I literally wrote the book on it. And in this episode, I'm walking you through the mistakes most healers make when attempting entity work, why technique without true understanding is dangerous, and what it actually takes to command interference at the highest levels so it does not come back. So, my story, how do I know all this information? Because my journey was interlaced with so much entity interference. In fact, I had teachers along the way or people that supported me that they almost said that it was unheard of. And if anybody had this much entity interference, they'd actually be dead or wouldn't be here, right? And so I had this journey to navigate, and it didn't make sense. And it took me a long time to move forward, to find the right pieces to elevation. And I made all the mistakes. So when I talk about all the things that people are doing and the mistakes with it, it's because I've done a number of them. And again, it was a hard lesson. So it's so great to be able to now express the truth. You know, with even the book I've written, I've had a lot of people say, you know, a lot of the stories in it of my life mirror their journey, or no one's ever spoken about it in this way or understood at these levels. And it's awful because when you're dealing with these realms, people don't understand. Some people even say they don't exist, and so it's not true. And they're those spiritual healers that are everything's love and light, and it's not true. They do exist. You know, light and darkness coexist. And if you're a person that has more issue, then it's a real problem. And so a lot of healers will also have a lot of issues. One, because they potentially have this spiritual kind of ability or this power, and entities love to siphon energetics, power. They like to take unclaimed gifts for themselves. But you work in the realm of being kind of constantly dealing with these energies, regardless of whether you realize it or not, because all blocks and restrictions go hand in hand with entity interference. So one of the biggest things is people will be doing healing work, and with entity interference, you have to be able to find the attachment mechanism. You have to be able to find why is the entity attached. It's like healing all the holes or all the places that they can attach. That's why the story or the myth or what people talk about protection, it's not right, it's not true. It's not even about protection. It's about sovereignty. It's about spiritual authority. It's about up-leveling so that things cannot keep creating a deregulation. And when people are doing healing work, they're just working with the healing, like the attachment mechanism. So when they do release and they're doing healing, with it, people are releasing entity interference, regardless of whether somebody understands that or not. And so hence is the problem with, you know, healing spaces. Spiritual healing circles, a lot of people are dropping or releasing trauma, and when they do, they release with it the entities. And if you have somebody that's not working directly with entity interference to actually release them to where they need to go, they almost free float in that environment and they wait for a reattachment. So somebody to come along with a likeness or a program or a way of like reattaching to somebody else. And so if you're a healer, even your treatment room becomes a place of energetics that can recycle. You know, people will say, oh, I'll just sage my room. I'll just fill my energy body with light and call in light. No, 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 no. So that's the second mistake. Sending entities to the light. Some of those entities don't belong in the light. Depends on what entities you're talking about. So that's the problem. A lot of people don't understand what they're dealing with. The different types of entities, you have to be able to understand what is the entity, what is the type of it. They go to different places. So sending it with, healing with light. Fragmented energy may be able to be dispersed or released with that. Some really low-level entities, potentially demonic realms, but it depends on what sort of light you're actually channeling as well or utilizing. Some people think there's just one light, one source. It doesn't work that way. It's a bit more complicated. There's levels to kind of light frequency. It depends on the person's spiritual connection as to which they're able to kind of hold or work with. So all of these things, again, I see people even like working with energies and entities and maybe sending it to the light. What if it doesn't belong there? It's not going to go. Potentially you draw, like you can even infuriate something else. Like, oh my goodness, if you don't have the right techniques, you're running the risk. You're not in control. You're not even across the world of energy of what you're really dealing with. So, one of the biggest things I see is transference. So the fact that over time a healer might get really bogged down, they're usually kind of taking on entity interference even from their clients. And it's not just about spiritual hygiene, because that's not even really a thing, even though people think it is. You might be having, attachment mechanisms. You might have energetic programs that, again, as a healer, maybe you're doing martyr style healing. Maybe you've kind of got programs that you will take other people's trauma and suffering for them. And again, usually these programs come through empathic kind of tendencies. That's actually born or originates from somewhere else, potentially a childhood, maybe preconditioning with an uncertain environment. Parents, maybe a parent was distant or, despondent. You kind of tune into people's energy too much to try and kind of work out how they're feeling. Maybe it's been, just highly sensitive people can kind of have this field that's more open, but it's actually a gift in a sense because they feel things intently. But with that, they can then hold this attachment with a whole lot of entity interference. So if you have any programs or your energy runs in that way, as a healer, you will be picking up more and more and more transference if you're not working in the right way with entity release and entity command. So another way is commanding without authority or locking entities away. So my story, I don't know. A lot of people think with the gifts that I have, they sort of say, oh, you must have been, had gifts as a child. No, I didn't. I didn't even realize the spiritual existed. I didn't even realize I was a spiritual being. I didn't even realize I kind of had that soul element. I know that sounds ridiculous now when I think about it, but I didn't. I didn't have that platform of understanding. And I actually got really sick. I was in major decline after having children, through stress, through suppression, not really dealing with my life in the right way, had Epstein-Barr virus, had postnatal depression, had all these other things. So I was really looking for a solution to heal my physicality. That's really all I was looking for. And I used to see endless therapists, healers. I loved natural therapies. And in the end, I came across one specific healing modality. And I really kind of gravitated to it. I saw some change in my, where I was at with a therapist. And in the end, I went on to study for myself. And so this is kind of like the beginnings of my journey realistically. And I was, I think I was about 38 at the time. And I was just really looking to heal myself. I wasn't looking to be a healer. It wasn't really the end goal of what I was trying to do. And I stepped into this learning. It was a 2-year program, diploma in advanced holistic kinesiology. And as I started, it was actually more intense than what I thought I was kind of getting into. It was really a 3-year kind of condensed program. And it was the foundations for everything. So I'm really grateful for my foundations in healing because I understood, the physical body. I learned all about organs and glands. I learned about neurological brain structures, how the brain works and how its role in healing. But then I opened up to the worlds of, energetic information. Wow, the spirit, the soul. Oh my God. But with all of that stuff, there's the other side to it, which is entity interference. But this particular learning that I engaged with, it wasn't really taught until right at the end. The teacher, who was an amazing, amazing man, and Australia is one of the most advanced for this, modality therapy in the world. So he was an outstanding, teacher and had so much knowledge. But he then didn't teach anything about entities and just in a set way until right at the end, because he actually said people weren't ready to handle that. I found that out too late. I kind of got in over my head way too late before I realised that. And the reason and how this happened was I had another woman that I was seeing that had been through the same teachings. So she was more advanced with me. Plus she was kind of dealing with other energetics and other realms, and she became a mentor to me. But she had learned a specific technique around entity release. And it was commanding, it was saying this big sequence, it was working with multidimensional influences. And then if they didn't listen, then you would lock them away in another dimension, right? And so she gave me this information. She gave this to me when I was only 6 months into my journey. And even my teacher at the time had noticed how much entity interference I had, and he said he had never seen anyone with so much interference, and he only knew this tiny little bit that I was struggling with. And she gave me this information. Oh my goodness. I don't know. It was kind of the making of me, but it was just about the breaking of me too. From that place, I was in over my head instantly. And in the world of entity interference, you don't want to draw attention to yourself if you can't back it up. And I couldn't back it up. But anyway, I was doing things, it kind of gave me this false, I don't know, like thinking that I was able to work with these energies, just like, oh yeah, I've got this under control. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I had to deal with psychic attack after psychic attack, had to deal with all of this types of interference. And I didn't realize it was actually some of the techniques that I was working with that were causing me more issues. But at the time, I couldn't put words to it. I didn't understand. But let's say you're locking entities away. You better hope that they don't get released. You better hope that another entity doesn't come and let it out. Because believe me, they don't just work singular. They often come in big groupings or packs. I even have people now that I teach that say that they've been taught to put it in this big box. Sorry, when I say what is the box, they say it's just this box in the quantum. We're in the quantum. The quantum is massive. What is the box? Do you even know what you're doing? No. If you don't understand what you're working with and what you're doing, that is alarm bells. Please, please, please have a deeper understanding, because honestly, it is dangerous. It is really, really dangerous unless you hold spiritual authority and the ability at these levels to command. Now, this is what I actually teach. So, in this book, The Truth Behind Entity Interference, it talks about all the different types of entities that exist. And it talks about the different dimensions, the different types, and how they affect people. But more importantly, it's a story about sovereignty and reclaiming rights. A lot of my stories are in there because I like to teach through that, or even client examples. But you have to understand conscious awareness is key to developing self, to advancement. But when it comes to entity interference, command, you have the spiritual authority. An entity can't say no and they have to go. And what I actually teach now, so people can actually come and learn from me. So if anything that I'm saying here resonates about entity interference, you want to understand in a deeper way what it actually means, what the different types of entities are, but more importantly, how they attach, why they are there. It's not about protection. Then this book gives you all the details. And if you're interested as a healer by up-leveling in your abilities to work at the highest levels of multidimensional demonic interferences in a safe, in the right way, and be able to command with high spiritual authority, then please, take a look at my book. All the information is in there. The details are in the show notes below. But I see people all the time getting themselves into trouble in those realms because they have learned techniques that are not, they're half techniques, or again, as I said, they expose them to having more and more entity interference. Or, they work in the world of entities and transference, and they don't understand also how that works. So over time, they just end up having more and more and more entity interference affecting them. And a healer that gets burnt out over time, if you are a healer and you're not up leveling, if you are a healer and you have health issues that you just cannot get on top of, if fatigue, if kind of, that chronic kind of health issues, I guarantee that entity interference is part of the equation underneath it all, and you haven't actually factored in that you're taking on more while you're healing other people. I have lots and lots of different stories, and kind of one comes to mind for me in telling all of these things. But I had a lady that I worked with that came through to me after years of decline. So, I work with a lot of other areas in healing as well, but entity interference is really the key kind of element that I do to facilitate all the healing processes. So I work at the highest levels of spiritual, energetic healing, reordering, all of these things only because I work at the highest levels of multidimensional entity interference. You have to be able to work with those things to create the highest kind of reordering and realignments. But I remember this one lady, she was a gifted healer. She worked in the realms of demonic influences, and she kind of had the ways that she would do it. And, she was kind of contained in the way that she was supporting people, even the place where she worked, all of these things. But she actually got asked to come into a mental hospital. She got asked to go in and help a person that had tried to commit suicide. And there was various reasons why. I think they were a veteran, actually. And she agreed to go and do some demonic release. But demonic is only part of the equation. And a lot of those, demonic's actually a lot easier to work with. And I always say multidimensional makes demonic look like a walk in the park. But interferences that can manipulate almost like the mind to those levels of what I'm talking about with this person that she went to see, that's not just simply demonic. Multidimensional can hold a lot of anchor points, and there's set reasons on why the mind is the biggest attachment mechanism that there is. It's all in my book. I talk about all the areas that entity interference can attach to and how they can create deregulation for a person right across mind, body, soul. But she went in there with one set of tools. Right, one set of tools, demonic. Oh, I can work with this. So I'm sure definitely there would have been a re-regulation and some support and help offered. But while she was focusing on this area, it's what you can't see that is the problem. That is the biggest issue. If you are not across the energetics, if you have not been understood or learnt or at the levels of the spiritual authority in your energetics to work at these high multidimensional levels, you won't even see it, won't even be on the radar. This is why people will endlessly visit healers after healer, and healers can only work at the level that they're kind of attuned to in themselves. They can only do for you almost what they've done for themselves in expanding their energetics. And if this high multidimensional entity interference exists, it's like it goes undetected. And so through this, she actually picked up a really high multidimensional interference, and it deregulated her whole life. And I think by the time she found me, that story was actually like maybe 15, 20 years in the past. She'd gotten really sick. There had been physicality decline, all of these things. She could no longer work anymore as a healer. And when I went through and did the healing and the release and the command and all the things I'm talking about with entity interference, that was the true story. But a lot of those really high influences, multidimensional, can create such a high deregulation to someone's spiritual ownership and connection. You'll never find it. You'll never see it. And you'll be working in the weeds of healing. And you just cannot elevate out of it. And often the highest entity interferences kind of are like a slow drain. They're actually worse. They're actually more high powerful, but they don't announce themselves as being this huge, obvious entity intrusion or interference. And so that's actually the biggest, most dangerous, like what can take place by starting to work in the realms of entity interference and not fully understanding what you're doing or not having the skill level to work at those highest levels. Because believe me, multidimensional interference is vast. people don't understand how vast it actually is. Things like, example, spiritual fraud. Have you noticed how much fraud is on earth? The physical mirrors the spiritual. There is so much spiritual fraud taking place, and it's from high multidimensional entity interferences that claim people's connections for themselves. And while those things are in place, sovereignty erodes, physicality will erode. So as a healer, honestly, I would love so many more people to be working at these high levels, because the amount of change, transformation, alignment that comes from being able to work in these fields of information, these fields of deregulation, is just, it sets people free. But you've got to understand exactly what you're doing, what you're working with, and understanding why it's there is the first step. So anyway, if you've liked this episode, please subscribe or follow. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.